This video is designed to provide the operator with periodic inspections and maintenance instructions for the Type AS32 R-11 fuel servicing tank truck, as well as some basic troubleshooting tips. This video supports the information in Work Packages 6 and 9 of the technical manual that accompanies this vehicle. Operator maintenance is limited to those services performed on a daily or weekly basis based on normal periods of use. Adjust the intervals as required when operating the refueler under adverse conditions. Any defect or abnormal condition must be reported immediately, then corrected to ensure proper vehicle readiness. In this video, unless otherwise stated, assume that all operator-discovered problems should be reported to maintenance. First, let's start with the daily inspection checks of the R-11. Inspect mirrors for damage. Check that all lights work. Also check for cracked or broken lenses. Check the operation of the neutral safety switch. The engine should not crank unless the transmission is in neutral. If the engine does crank when the transmission is not in the neutral position, there is a problem that should be reported to maintenance. Check under the PTO for evidence of leakage. Minor seepage that looks like a dark area around shafts is acceptable, but wet areas and dripping lubricant indicate a leaking seal, which is not acceptable. Check the engine air filter restriction indicator. It should be replaced if it shows in the red area. Make a routine check of the air pressure warning system. The buzzer should sound while air pressure is below 65 psi. There is a problem if the air pressure is below 65 psi and the buzzer does not sound. Look for leakage around the rear axle housings. Minor seepage that looks like dark areas around the drive shafts or plugs and breathers is acceptable, but wet areas and dripping lubricant indicates a leaking seal that must be reported. Daily inspection of the fuel delivery system is important. Check all fuel piping, control lines, and tubing for leaks or damage. Tighten any loose connections. Also check the filter separator for leaks that need to be repaired. Check the filter separator differential pressure gauge. If the gauge indicates more than 15 psi, the elements must be replaced. Carefully observe all of the controls and instruments during use for any incorrect, erratic, or unusual readings that should be reported. If the nozzle pressure reading is above 55 psi, discontinue the fueling operations and determine the cause. The malfunction should be repaired before returning the refueler to service. Check the deadman control for proper operation. If actuating the deadman does not begin fuel flow, or if releasing the deadman does not stop fuel flow, have the deadman control checked. Check the fueling nozzles for proper operation and leaks. Report any leaking or defective nozzles to maintenance. Make routine checks of the auxiliary throttle for proper operation by performing this test. Rotate the auxiliary throttle control counterclockwise. The engine RPM should decrease. Rotate the throttle clockwise and the RPM should increase. Depress the center button. The engine should return to idle. If the auxiliary throttle fails this test, the system must be checked and repairs made. Each day, check the static ground reel cables, clip and plug for damage. Also check for the proper operation of the rewind mechanism. Defective cables, clips, or plugs should be replaced. Maintenance personnel must also replace the entire reel if the rewind mechanism no longer functions properly. Now let's take a look at some of the inspections that must be made on a weekly basis. All of these tasks with the proper corrective actions can be found in Work Package 6 of the technical manual. Again, for time-saving purposes, in this video, assume that all problems, damages, defects, and leaks should be immediately reported to maintenance for equipment repair or replacement, unless stated otherwise. Weekly inspection of the cab and chassis include a check of the operation and general condition of the doors and weather seals. Inspect seats for damaged upholstery and for proper operation. If the seat mechanisms stick or bind, apply a small amount of a light lubricant to the mechanisms. If there is still a problem, notify maintenance. Check seat belts for damage or wear and inspect the security of the mounting hardware. Tighten any loose hardware. Perform operational checks of both the heater defroster and air conditioning systems by operating them in the various modes. Inspect the cab panels for exposed areas subject to rust. Perform an operational check of the windshield wipers by running them through the various speeds and modes. Also check the wiper blades for wear or damage. In the steering system, check the steering pump, hoses, the power steering reservoir, and cap for leaks. Check the battery connections for security and corrosion. Check the vehicle for missing or damaged data plates. With the engine stopped, check the fan belt for fraying or structural damage. Small cracks that run across the belt grooves are acceptable. Longitudinal cracks that expose internal cords of the belt are not acceptable and should be reported. Check the fuel tank and caps for leaks, corrosion, or structural damage. Replace a faulty cap gasket if it is leaking. Small, shallow dents in the fuel tank are acceptable. Deep dents or gouges that may cause future leaks are not acceptable and should be reported. On the split shaft PTO, check the air shift unit for proper operation. If the PTO control shifts into and out of the engaged position correctly during normal fueling operations, it may be assumed that the shift unit is operating properly. On the fuel delivery system, clean and inspect the overwing nozzle strainer. Check all manually operated valves for proper operation by opening and closing the normally closed valves, and by opening and closing the normally open valves. Make certain that each one can be operated and that no leaks exist at the shafts or flanges. Within the air control system, check for proper operation of the air dryer. Generous amounts of condensation accumulating in the air tanks is an indication that the air dryer is not functioning properly. Make a weekly check of the wheels and tires. Check the tightness of the wheel mounting nuts and tighten if necessary. Also check for the proper inflation pressure. If necessary, add air to bring to the proper pressure. The front and rear tires should be at 110 psi. This concludes the periodic maintenance portion of the video. Next are some basic troubleshooting scenarios that may occur during normal use of the R-11. This information is a simple checklist for the operator. It is not intended to represent a complete list of problems or malfunctions of the refueler. Work Package 9 of the Technical Manual contains a detailed troubleshooting chart. It is provided to assist the operator and maintenance personnel in diagnosing and correcting malfunctions that may occur during normal operations. These troubleshooting procedures are described with the assumption that all controls are in their proper position for the operation being performed. Always check that all controls are in their proper position before reporting a problem to maintenance. Note, for all testing that requires running the engine, be sure to run the engine at idle speed unless directed to do so otherwise. Problem: the engine will not crank or crank slowly. The battery charge could be low. Check the battery voltage. Charge if needed. Or the starting circuit connections are loose or corroded. Clean and tighten connections. Problem: if the engine does not crank. It could be that the shift control is not in neutral. Place the shift control in neutral. Problem: the engine cranks but will not start and there is no visible smoke from the exhaust. It could be that there is no fuel in the tank. If this is the case, add fuel. Problem: the engine starts but will not keep running. The idle speed could be too low. Have the idle speed adjusted. It could also mean that the engine is starting under load. Disengage the PTO. Problem: The engine surges at idle. Check for low fuel in the tank and add fuel if necessary. Problem: the lubricating oil pressure is too low. Check for an incorrect oil level and add or drain oil as necessary. Problem: the engine uses too much oil. Check for leaks and report them to maintenance for repair. Problem: the coolant temperature is above normal. Check for low coolant level and add coolant. Problem: there is coolant loss. Check for a defective radiator cap or for a leak in a coolant hose and report to maintenance for repair or replacement. Problem: if you happen to notice excessive exhaust smoke under load. This could indicate a lugging engine. Use a lower gear. Problem: if you notice a fuel knock. It could mean that the engine is overloaded. Use a lower gear. If reducing to a lower gear doesn't correct the problem, the vehicle should be turned into maintenance for corrective actions. Problem: low main transmission pressure in all ranges. Could mean a low oil level. Add oil to the proper level. Problem: the PTO cannot be shifted to the road or pump position. The engine RPM could be too high. Make sure engine speed is at idle. The parking brake could be released. Apply the parking brake. The transmission could be out of neutral position. Place transmission in neutral. There could be low air pressure. Build up air pressure. These are just a few examples of the problems that could occur under normal operations. For a more complete description of problems and their probable causes and corrections, please refer to Work Package 9 in the Technical Manual. This concludes video number 4.